Today we're going to do the installation of the T-Rex billet throttle and low friction cable on the Cobra CX50. When you receive your T-Rex billet throttle, it's going to come prepackaged. It's going to have a date when it was installed and put together. In the box you'll receive the T-Rex billet throttle assembly and a sticker. After you receive your T-Rex billet throttle, make sure you ordered the correct throttle tube size. You have two options. All Cobra 50s come stock with the micro tube. If you have Pro Taper micro bars, Mica metal Tyke bars, the micro tube is the one that you want. The standard tube, if you have standard size bars. Most big bikes use the standard tube, and it's 7/8 inch tube. The T-Rex low friction cable is a completely new design. No other manufacturer is building a cable like this. It has a special low friction liner. You can pretty much tie this in a knot, and there's absolutely no resistance whatsoever on the cable. For the Cobra 50 application and the KTM 50 application, the carburetor cap will thread directly onto the T-Rex cable. There's an adjuster nut to help adjust if you need more or less slack on the throttle cable itself. Previously, and on stock bikes, you might recall there's just a rubber boot that holds that on, and the cable can actually pop out of the cap, causing the throttle to be wide open. The safety advantages over this are huge. We also have a new billet aluminum cap that will be released very soon, which eliminates the other safety feature of the cable pulling out of the threads of the cap or the threads cross-threading onto the carburetor itself. The cable also is much thicker than a normal cable and 20 to 40% less friction than a stock cable. For the installation, you'll need a 2.5 millimeter hex head, 3 millimeter hex head, 4 millimeter hex head, a large flathead screwdriver, medium flathead screwdriver, Phillips head screwdriver, an 8 millimeter end wrench, and a 10 millimeter end wrench. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure you have a clean bike. There's no dirt, dust, anything in the area you're going to be working. The carburetor has a lot of small parts inside of it. You don't want those to get dirty. Turn the fuel off. Remove the fuel hose to the carburetor, and then we're going to unscrew the top of the carburetor cap, and then we'll loosen the two bolts on the side of the carburetor. Alright, so the fuel's turned off. Slide the fuel hose off of the petcock, just so it's out of the way. Next thing we're going to do are loosen the two bolts that hold the carburetor boots on. And just loosen them so we can pivot the carburetor. So those are loose. Pivot the carburetor to the side, and then just unthread the carburetor cap. If you have an old style cable, you may have zip ties holding this together. Cut the zip ties, unthread that. Pull out the assembly, remove the slide and the spring and the carb cap. Make sure the spring doesn't go flying across the room. So you have the carb cap, the spring, the slide, and then the cable holder. And then the next part is critical. Lay the parts down individually and in the order that they came off. When you install the slide, make sure the white cable keeper is in the correct orientation. The tapered part faces up and goes into the spring, and there is a notch on the bottom that needs to go into the larger hole in the bottom of the slide. Once the cap is removed, you'll need to take an 8 millimeter end wrench and remove the old cable adjuster. So you just have the carburetor cap. Next, take a 4mm hex head and you're going to remove the very bottom bolt that holds the radiator to the frame. That's going to allow you to thread the new cable. This is the old cable. Next we're going to take the T-Rex cable and we're going to put it in the exact spot as the old cable so you get the routing of the new cable correct. Slide the new T-Rex cable next to the radiator. Some people like to take the gray sheath off of the cable. Some people like to trim the cable. Most of the time you can leave the sheath on the cable and just reassemble the radiator and you have plenty of clearance for the new T-Rex cable. Next, take a 4mm hex head. We're going to loosen the two bolts holding the old throttle assembly. If your throttle has a rubber boot, just remove the rubber boot and loosen the two hex heads. Once the hex heads are loose, we're going to remove the throttle and the cable together and it'll just slide right out. Before installing your new T-Rex billet throttle, we're going to remove the threaded adapter from the throttle assembly. So take a 2.5mm hex head, loosen the set screw on the back side of it, and we're going to just slide the threaded adapter out and set it aside. Next, undo the inspection cover. We're going to take that off and then we're going to remove the pulley. You can either grab it and pull it or put it upside down and it'll pop right out. Before you slide your T-Rex billet throttle on the handlebar, make sure the handlebar is completely clean. There's no dirt or debris in the end. The T-Rex billet throttle has a completely sealed billet throttle tube. Once it's on the bar, there is no way for any dirt to get inside of the tube itself. Make sure the O-ring inside of the housing has a little bit of lubrication on it. You can use dish soap, WD-40. It's a really tight fit. The tolerances are very close and it goes on very snugly once you slide it on the end of the handlebar. Make sure the tube is on all the way. You want just a hair of free play on the end of the tube itself. The next step, take your threaded adapter and we're going to thread it onto the T-Rex low friction cable. Loosen the adjuster and thread it on as far as you can get it on there. And then we're going to insert that into the throttle. Next, install the soldered end into the billet tube. Slide in, make sure everything fits squarely and the cable goes through the notch. Next, simply slide the threaded adapter into the housing and tighten the set screw snugly. Take your carburetor cap, thread it onto the T-Rex cable, thread it all the way up, make sure your adjuster nut's all the way up. Next we're going to take the spring, slide it on. Sometimes it's easier to use needle nose pliers to compress this spring on there. Once that's compressed, you can put the cable in the slide and then make sure the orientation is correct on the cable keeper. Make sure the spring goes over the cable keeper. The white cable keeper notch should fit into the round notch next to the end of the cable. Next, you'll want to orient the slide so the large cutout is facing this side of the carburetor. Okay, next we're going to just slide it in. You want to make sure it slides all the way in freely. Then we're going to twist the carburetor up and down, and then thread the cap on top of the carburetor. Make sure the cap threads on easily without cross threading. Next, put your fuel line back on the fuel petcock. Turn your fuel on, then install the radiator hold down bolt. The last step, take your pulley, make sure it works freely, super smooth. We're going to install the cable into the side of the pulley. Make sure the cable is inside of the slot on the pulley. Then we're going to take our inspection cover and just thread it on. This only needs to be snug. It does not need to be over tightened. Don't use a pair of pliers. Just make it snug. Now we're going to adjust the cable. So we're going to back the cable off, and that's going to take out any slack that's in the cable. You always want just a little bit of slack. If it's too tight, it's going to have a high idle. So back it off. That's perfect. Tighten the secure adjusting nut. Put the boot up over it. The last step is to take a 2.5 millimeter. Take your set screw, remove it, and just put a little bit of Loctite on the end of the set screw, and then reinstall it and install it snugly. These screws can fall out if they're not Loctited or on there securely. Then take your 4 millimeter and tighten the 2 bolts that hold the throttle on the throttle assembly, and you're ready to go. Smooth as butter.